Good morning. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Anne McMahon, Public Programs Officer, Belco Arts. We're coming to you today from Ngunnawal country, and we're excited to bring you this online discussion in association with Other Worlds, exploring the universe of Graeme Base. On behalf of Belco Arts, I would like to thank our partners, the National Centre for Australian Children's Literature, Libraries ACT, Events ACT, and our guest of honour, Graeme Base. As we have a great many people registered today, your microphone will be muted to maintain the best possible sound quality. Please direct any burning questions through the Q&A function. Selected questions will be answered towards the end of the session. If your screen freezes, turn off your video to preserve bandwidth for the presentation. Use the cursor to find your toolbar at the bottom of the screen and look for the video and Q&A icons. Please share your response to this event by completing the survey in the email you receive. I'm very pleased to introduce our moderator, Sarah Stead, confessed bookaholic and Director of Content and Engagement, Libraries ACT. Over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Anne, and welcome everybody. We're very pleased at Libraries ACT to be part of this event and to be supporting the Belco Arts exhibition of Graeme Base's artwork. I'd like to acknowledge before we start the traditional owners of the lands that we're all meeting on. For those of us in Canberra, that's the lands of the Ngunnawal people. Graeme is on the lands of the Boon Wurrung people, and I know there will be people watching this from all around Australia on other traditional lands as well. So we pay respects to elders past, present and emerging, and welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. As Anne said, I am Sarah Steed and I'm your moderator for today. And we have a wonderful lineup of panellists, starting with our special guest, Graeme Base. Graeme is a celebrated author and an illustrator. And after failing heroically as a professional musician in the mid-1980s, an exceptionally fertile period for wannabe rock stars, a 20-something-year-old Graeme took a good hard look at himself and decided to make use of his art school education, courtesy of Swinburne University, and he started making picture books. He's been very focused on creating imaginative artwork for children's publishing ever since. Some of his better known books are, of course, Animalia, The 11th Hour, The Sign of the Seahorse, The Waterhole, and Juno's Garden. And he does have some more recent titles, including The Curse of the Vampire Robot, a mashup of vampire mythology and geeky computer speak set in the Scottish Highlands. So a very unusual mix there, but welcome, Graeme.
Thank you. Good to be here.
We also have Tanya McCartney, a Canberra-based author, editor and illustrator. Tanya has made around 60 books for children and adults and has illustrated, edited and designed many of them as well. Her works have reached the hands of children in 20 countries around the world and have been shortlisted for an array of awards, including the New South Wales Premier's Literary Award, the World Illustration Awards and Museums Australasia Publication Design Awards. In 2013, Tanya reconnected with her love of illustration and has gone on to produce several illustrated maps, jigsaw puzzles, greeting cards, and a library of books specialising in junior fiction, non-fiction, and picture books. And today is the launch of her latest, which I'm sure she will mention at some point. Congratulations, Tanya.
Thank you.
And our third panellist is Dr. Belle Alderman, Director of the National Centre for Australian Children's Literature. Belle has spent a lifetime in children's books as an early reader, a secondary English teacher, teacher librarian in a primary school, and a university academic, researching and teaching children's literature. She has since retired and became Director of the National Centre for Australian Children's Literature in her retirement, and she is ever involved in all things children's literature through events, exhibitions, wide-ranging activities relating to the children's literature field. And I have known Belle for a very long time as well through all of those activities. So welcome, Belle.
Thanks.
Okay, well, we'll get started with our questions. And I thought we would start with one relating to our theme. And the theme is a quote: "A picture is worth 1,000 words." What does that actually mean to each of you? Graeme, if we can perhaps start with you.
Well, I'm glad it does. I wouldn't want to have to do a picture for every word in the books there forever. The thing is, I was always planning on being an artist, so the illustrations in my work was what sort of drove me at the beginning. Although I have discovered over the last 30 or 35 years the joy of actually the texts. For me, early on, I only wrote a text so that I could do the pictures, and I still feel that my work is very much driven by the images, to the extent that even if you completely just turned off the text or didn't read it, you would still, I hope, be able to sort of track and follow the story. And of course, when you look into the pictures, my hope at least is that you see other stuff which isn't in the text, lots and lots of hidden things, other layers of meaning, which become sort of clear the more you look at the art. So maybe that's where the value of the picture is it worth 1,000 words comes in, that it can get your mind working in a different way, a visual way. As kids read a text, they'll see one simple part of what I'm trying to say, but when they look into the artwork, that'll begin to expand in their minds and take them into directions.
How much does that? How much of that is actually a conscious thing for you when you're creating the artwork, the different layers?
It wasn't at the beginning, I've got to say. I was pretty sort of naive, just making it up as I went along at the beginning. One of the very early books was Animalia, which has just gone on to be probably the best known of all of the books I did. And I had no idea what I was really doing or why I even was doing it at all. I mean, it wasn't as though the world was in desperate need of yet another English language alphabet book. There were lots of those out there already. So for me, it was just driven by a great desire to create and to draw. And I wanted to draw everything, very modest ambition. So I thought I'd just pack it into an alphabet book and put as many things as I could in each picture, because I've always loved detail. And of course, the result of that was exactly what I was just describing, where you would just read one of the alliterations for the page, a horrible hairy hogs hurrying homeward on heavily harnessed horses, which is fun in its own way. There's musicality and sort of a certain sort of rhythm to it, which I found appealing. But it's all the other stuff in the pictures then suddenly take you into a whole world, which has been sort of generated through the letter H. I didn't really understand the power of that at that time. It's only later that I've realized that that the layering that the artwork and the text together create is tremendously powerful. So from in recent years, it's been very very considered and very well planned that the layering that occurs in the books in terms of text and then expanding it in the artwork, but also the message level, where a very young reader will understand the book in quite a simple way, naturally, but their older brother or sister may see something else. Mum and dad will see another layer again. And it's all there for the reader to grow into, or to leap out from as they become cognizant of those things.
Mm. And Tanya, what's your experience of that? Do you agree with a picture being worth 1,000 words?
What Graeme said. I mean, particularly the part I loved, Graeme, what you said about turning off the text and that the illustrations have their own narrative, and that's a deep, deep passion of mine and something that that I strive for in my own work. So for me, it's definitely this idea. It's like those Pixar films where there's these visuals and then there's these sub narratives that the adults get and that the kids get, and that there's various levels of understanding. And I think that arguably text is more direct, whereas image can be interpreted in so many different ways. And as Graeme said about the different levels of, comprehension, but not only that, for children who struggle to decode text. So kids can gain so much meaning from looking at image and those lovely little nuances. So for me, I think that, I think there's a language in pictures that's just so deeply important for so very many reasons. Deep passion of mine.
And Belle, what's your experience been in picture books over the years and the value of pictures?
When I was growing up, most of the books were not illustrated. I was reading things like Heidi and Treasure Island. And so I was conjuring up my own images, which were, pretty amazing to me. But then when my son was born, I decided he was going to be a reader, no matter what. So I joined him up at a book club when he was born. And from that moment, I only got 3 books a month. They came in the mail. And by the time he could toddle over and open the door, he had very specific taste. And you know what he liked? The images. He loved Where the Wild Things Are, which was just an amazing experience. When I read that book to him, I finished it and he said, read it again, very viciously. And I read it again, thinking, what have I done? Because it's a pretty wild book. Read it again. And then he jumped up, leaped around the room, screeching and howling. And to me, that is what a good book can do. It can reach inside you and make you be something else. It can bring your imagination to the fore.
Absolutely. I think we've all got memories of books that we read as young children or that we've read to young children that have had a real impact. Graeme, what are your earliest memories of drawing or reading and seeing pictures in books yourself?
The funny thing is that my earliest memories of my parents interacting with me in that way was actually not books at all. It was music. My mum and dad were both great, passionate lovers of classical music. And my brother and I shared a room. This was when we were back in England before I was 8, when we came out to Australia. And Dad would bring the old glorious mono record player into the room and play us just things like Rachmaninoff, Dvorak, Sibelius. And so I grew up with a great love of that stuff, turned me into a total nerd at school because all the other kids were listening to pop music and I sort of knew about the classics. But Mum and Dad were always horrified that was my earliest recollection because they tell me, oh, we absolutely read to you, Graeme. Of course we did. It's just that music had a bigger impact. I was actually a very, very slow reader. I think I had a fairly good bout of dyslexia, can hardly say the word, when I was young. Did perfect mirror writing, things like that, and got everything, back to front. And I'm still parts of that are with me now. So books were hard. And it was only really towards the end of primary school, beginning of high school, that I was beginning to get the hang of it. I'm still an appallingly slow reader. Even now I read for punctuation. I wouldn't have put a colon there. I would have put a dash and then left a colon for later. Again, total nerd. And it was a book called The Lord of the Rings that made the difference. This is way before it was a movie like that. It was given to me by my Latin teacher, of all things. I did Latin at school, goodness knows. I just saw the size of the book. I remember 1,065 pages long, all in one big paperback. I thought, oh, I'm never going to read this, but I had to make a try because I'd been given it by my teacher who thought I would like it. And I was just captivated. And I read the book, I would say 10, 12 times during my high school years. And it sort of broke open that idea of books and the way they triggered imagination. And just going back to that previous thing about a picture worth 1,000 words, sometimes a word is worth 1,000 pictures, because the imagery, the strength of the storytelling and the world that Tolkien created without any pictures at all back in those days, there were no illustrated versions and no film, was just enormous. And the whole world was absolutely real to me visually. So, a really masterful text can actually obviate the need for pictures.
Yeah, I think Tolkien has made a big impact on many people in their early years, and is certainly a favourite for a lot of both adults and still young people now. Tanya, what are your earliest memories of books, reading, illustration?
Well, I actually had a very book-loving mum, and I find it a really visceral memory. I can feel sitting on her lap. I can feel snuggled up in bed. I can feel the lamp on. I can feel hear the swish of the page and smell the ink, all that kind of thing. And in fact, even today, when I pick up a brand new picture book, I'll just smell it. And I just, it takes me back to childhood. So having that, I have a visceral reaction. And my similar to what Belle was saying, a lot of my early reading was, Blinky Bill and May Gibbs books and things that were scantily illustrated, but I can still remember, this is revealing my age. I can still remember when the Very Hungry Caterpillar was first released, and Mum bought it for me. And I must have been quite young, because I remember sitting on her lap and being absolutely entranced at the way the pages were cut, at the vibrant illustrations. And I can still to this day feel my little tiny finger, which was small enough to fit in the holes that the caterpillar made through the pages, through the flaps of that book. So I think that book single-handedly had such a deep effect on my life, and on my love of words, my love of pictures, and eventual falling into the children's book world, for sure.
I think, again, that's one, but at a different age group, that has a big impact on a lot of readers. Certainly in the library, we hear people talking about it, borrowing it all the time.
It's my go-to gift book for me, for every child.
It's perfect. Yes. I want to just go back to something that you mentioned, Graeme, which was about world building. And I think that that's one of the things that obviously Tolkien was pretty amazing at, was building worlds. But all authors and illustrators are involved in world building as part of their storytelling, and it's very clear in your books. Where do you start when you're world building? What is it that kind of helps you create those worlds?
It always starts visually for me. I've been lucky to travel a lot, both for work and just for the hell of it, depending on whether you're talking to the tax man or not. And I know every time I go away, I'm going to come back with an idea for a new book. It always happens. First time I ever went scuba diving, I couldn't go scuba diving in Australia because I used to get asthma, and you're not allowed to, but in other parts of the world, they don't care. So I was able to go scuba diving, didn't I? And came away with the idea for The Sign of the Seahorse, a book all set underwater. Went to Cambodia, to Angkor Wat, the ruins, the amazing ruins of Angkor Wat, and I was totally ready for the idea of a book, and I didn't know what it would be. But so the inspiration starts there, and then what I try to do. I mean, you can't then just go home and just do 20 or 30 illustrations and expect it to make a book. You've got to plan these things, and especially with the picture book, because you've got very limited amount of pages, limited amount of text before people go, oh, this is too long. So you have to be very, very careful to make sure you know what's going to happen on each page. So I will then shelve my desire to illustrate this world that I've sort of conjured up in my mind, and just knuckle down and make sure I've got a comprehensible and worthwhile story, thinking about the levels of meaning, what will happen on each page, and then slowly sort of build it up from there. But again, for me, always starts just with, wow, I want to draw this. I want to capture this visually somehow.
Yeah. And Belle, have you got any examples that you'd like to share of some particular worlds that you've really enjoyed in children's books?
Well, I mentioned that how much I loved Heidi when I was a little girl, and it had a couple of illustrations, but back then you didn't illustrate a long novel like that. But when Lauren Child, who's a British illustrator, illustrated a version of it, Pippi Heidi, I actually had to have the book. I mean, what I'd like to say is a little bit about my grandson. And now when he was born, I was determined he was going to be a reader. He was going to love picture books. He was going to love stories. So I used to give him 2 or 3 books for his birthday and 2 or 3 books for his Christmas present, and if there was another. And one of the things when he was about 13, he said, Grandma, do you think this year I've discovered Sean Tan's website? And I said, yeah. He said, do you think I could have one of the artworks? And I said, yeah. And what he wanted was one of those GK prints. So I was able to organize that, send it from Books Illustrated in Melbourne. And he said, I'd like to frame it. Do you think you could give me some money so I could frame it? So in the end, I said, well, which illustration are you picking? And he picked the one where the creature comes into the New York harbor and the man feels very, discombobulated. He doesn't know where he is. And I thought, well, he's only 12 years old. That's a very interesting piece of art. That whole book doesn't have any words. He loved the stories that he was getting from that book. And I just find that pretty amazing. So we know that the artwork is hugely important.
Yes, I think wordless picture books are very special. The ones that we see make a real difference to some kids in particular. Tanya, what about you? What is it about world building that you have learnt and used in your own creations?
For me, it's about the character. So when I create my worlds for my books, like with Plume, I base them around the character. I set that world around their wants, their needs, their desires, who they are. So it's very much character oriented. And then of course, I do a lot of storyboarding. So I'll go through and what I like to do with my worlds is not only combine the direct narrative with a lot of nuance, but I actually love to link things. So I think that in the real world, there's so many links. So when we go through our day, when our day starts out and when our day ends, there's so many links along the way. So I like to build my worlds and my narratives in a way that come back almost to the beginning of the story, if that makes sense. So it's like a cyclical narrative, or it has some kind of reference or tie in to what's happened in the past. And I guess that's what life is, isn't it? We have the future and we have the past, and they all combine. So that's how I approach things.
Thank you. Graeme, what is it that makes a story and its illustrations so compelling for you and memorable? Perhaps some of your own, but also ones that you've enjoyed over the years.
Well, just speaking for mine, it has to be something which is meaningful and worthwhile for me. I know that when I first started, it was totally about me as an artist and just wanting to do stuff, as I was saying with Animalia. It wasn't because I wanted to teach the kids an alphabet. It really was. I just got to confess that. I just wanted to draw. But I think probably the transformation for me was actually when I became a dad, and then 3 times over, I realized that I had this kind of like, minor superpower where I could get sort of words and pictures in front of a whole bunch of kids, not just my own, through books. And I should use this power for good rather than evil. So I sort of thought more about, the themes and the worth, I suppose, of a story, where Animalia and the 11th Hour were really, to some extent, puzzle books with a lot of good fun stuff. Later books, Worst Band in the Universe is to do with tolerance and understanding that every generation has its own voice and will innovate, and they must innovate whether you like it or not, and that combined with tradition creates progress, things like that, which sounds all a bit weighty, but it was something I wanted to say. I did a book called The Amazing Monster Detectoscope, which is about facing fears, childhood fears. Somebody once said, if you're scared of something, write about it, pin it to paper, and it seems a lot less sort of scary once you've sort of really dug down into it, which is what the hero does in that book. So what I'm trying to say is that the work has to be meaningful for me to then, I suppose, bother or put in the effort, the time to create a book and offer that out into the public. And I guess that's the same with the books that I read. I mean, if there was a book which you felt was purely being made by somebody as a potboiler, dare I say, an airport novel where it was the 25th in the series, you begin to wonder whether it's really been done by the author for just because it's their job and their sort of source of income, rather than because there's something they genuinely want to say and share. So I think that honesty from the originator, the creator, is really important, really central to whether a book works for you and whether it lasts the test of time.
And Tanya, you've already mentioned some books that were memorable from your childhood, but are there any any particular books of your own, any particular illustrations that you find are your favourites, that you really want to share more than something else?
Oh gosh, I always kids often ask me this question at schools, and it's just such a difficult one because it's often the one that's just been released because it's all exciting, and and you've worked so darn hard, and you're exhausted, and you want to go, woohoo! It's finally in the flesh, and I can let go of production. I do obviously have a soft spot for Plume because he has my heart. And in fact, I was just telling my wonderful editor, Ian McGold, that I'll often be drawing Plume and Ava the albatross, and I'll get tears in my eyes, and I just love them. And the other characters that I feel that way about are Evie and Pog. So that was my junior fiction series, and I just developed such a deep connection to them, and they were just so very real for me. So I strongly feel that the best books are character driven and have really complex and detailed characters, and that's what a good story is. It's about the person, and it's about championing that person and that main character. So yeah, I think probably Evie and Pog, probably Plume, and yeah. It's hard to say. It's like choosing your favourite.
I know, I put you on the spot.
Yeah, just I guess just that character connection, and I think children in particular love to feel connected to character and love to see themselves in the character, and we all love a flawed character. We don't want the I'm so fabulous and perfect character. We want someone that's flawed just as we are. So yeah.
Graeme, I think you wanted to say something there, did you?
Oh, I know that I was just laughing at that. There's the classic sort of, what's your favourite picture question, and there's no doubt that, as Tanya was saying, when you finish your book, you just go, oh, thank goodness, it's over. And it's only much later in life that I think you look back on books and you can select, sometimes even favourite books or favourite images from them. But at the time, it's just a sort of just a relief to go, it's done, it's finished, because these things take months and months and months to do. I was also, I can see there was a question here which has just come up on chat from Vanessa asking about Animalia in my case, and how I felt about doing the next book. And it just reminded me how after I finished it, people said to me about Animalia, gee, what are you going to do next? Why don't you do a sequel? Oh, this was to do with like having characters, because I was thinking, I don't put characters in my books very much. Mostly they're about sort of worlds and imagining, and I haven't done sort of sequels. And I thought with Animalia, it's an alphabet book. How do you do a sequel? Did I miss a couple of letters? Where do you go with that? I guess they meant numbers or something, but I remember actually being terrified after that book, that that was it. I had no more ideas. I'd done everything that I could possibly think of. And I was a bit scared of being a one-hit wonder. And it was only when later I had this idea for a mystery story, which came out as the 11th Hour, that I got over that sort of first book terror. Well, it wasn't quite my first book, but close enough. The first book that actually went somewhere. Sorry, anyway, I sort of interrupted.
No, that's fine. It's all very interesting. Belle, I was wondering about, with the National Centre for Australian Children's Literature, you get a lot of visitors, people contacting the centre, and many of them would naturally have favourites. Are there any Australian books that jump out in your memory that people are often asking for?
Well, we do collect the artwork and the papers and manuscripts of authors and illustrators. So we have the advantage really of seeing the inner world that Graeme is talking about and that Tanya is talking about, how that idea was moved on or it grew into something totally different from what it began. And so one of the things that we had out on display at one time was we just recently received some artwork from Bob Graham. So he normally has 3 dummy books. Somehow or other, 3 is what it takes him to decide this is the layout that he wants. And so there was a little girl who was about 12 years old, and she was fascinated by the crossings out, how he changed the words and how he, crossed out this whole illustration that she loved. And she said, she was obviously mesmerized. And later her father emailed me and said, you know, her teacher told her she couldn't write any more stories because she couldn't spell. Until she learned to spell, she couldn't write anymore. And I was like, he said, but you know what? When she saw that Bob Graham crossing out, she went back to writing with a ferocity. And I thought, that's the whole point of trying to show the creative process. You can be inspirational. So that, to me, that's a story I'll never forget.
That's a perfect segue for me. Thank you, Belle, into
You're
the
welcome.
creative process. Graeme, can you tell us a little bit about the creative process that you use? Is it the same for each of your books? Is it different depending on the story?
It's pretty well the same as I said earlier, just visually inspired, but then put that away and get on with the text to make sure the story, is, I was going to say rock solid. One of the things, but not quite, because one of the things that's rather nice about doing the words and the pictures is that you can keep both intention all the way through to the end. And as I developed the art a little bit further down the track, I could go back and I could change that text because it'd be better if I do so. I can show something different in the artwork, so that there is that sort of toing and froing, but only once the text is pretty well locked down. Something's happened to me that over the years. I've discovered the joy of working on screen, which I never thought would happen. I was certainly trained in the old sort of way with watercolor, and although I wasn't quite trained, I kind of made it up myself, to be honest. But it was all traditional sort of materials and techniques. But I had a bit of a sort of moment of truth when I'm doing this now, because I still remember I got terrible carpal tunnel, RSI, in my wrist at one point. I was working on the water hole from memory, and at the same time my eyes were going, and I thought, I'm going to have to retire. I can't work for like 20 minutes, half an hour, just trying to get rid of the pain. And I also realized I couldn't actually see what I was doing. I was doing this weird duck thing where I'd be sort of working like this, and I'd go, and I'd go like this, and people said, what are you doing? I realized I was in trouble. So a friend of mine who worked in the animation business at the time said, why don't you try, working, on screen where you can just enlarge things to see what you're doing. I thought, I can't do it. I've tried that stuff. It's rubbish. But technology has sort of marched along, and it's amazing now that, in fact, I've been able to create some images in more recent years by combination. I still draw and I still create my work on paper, but at a certain point it transfers onto screen, and I can get lighting effects and subtleties and depth and atmospheric perspective that simply I don't have the skills to do any other way. I'm not that good at the traditional stuff I discovered. So there's a bit of a resistance, I think, to sometimes when you say, I work digitally, oh, really? And there's a bit of a sort of, it's a bit of a strange thing, but it'd be like saying to a musician, who, and almost everything you hear now has a digital component to it musically, and you couldn't say that, somebody who had played an amazing piece on a synthesizer was any worse than playing it on a grand piano. So that's the main change that I've discovered over my artistic journey, is adding the screen and the stylus to my suite of weapons.
I'm going to throw in one of the questions that people have been putting in the Q&A as well. Narita has asked, do you experiment with different mediums for your illustrations? And I guess, digital is a medium, but do you play around more than that?
Well, just for me, I'm not sure. I don't know whether you wanted me to respond to that, because I'm sure Tanya has a comment as well. But the most recent book that I just finished, called "The Curse of the Vampire Robot," I don't have a copy here. Darn! I should. What? Missed a trick there. Anyway, it harks back to a childhood love of Albrecht Dürer, the I think 15th century German artist who did wonderfully detailed woodcuts, miraculously fine detailed woodcuts. And I was always absolutely besotted with that. So I thought, well, when I do this sort of weird sort of vampire computer horror story, all set in the Scottish Highlands, it would be fun to use this really old-fashioned style of woodcut. So all of the pictures in that book are actually black and white. And it's the first time that I've done that since my very first book, My Grandma Lived in Gooley Gulch, where half the pictures were actually done in pen and ink and half were done in colour. So a bit of a full circle there for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And yes, Tanya, would you like to comment on your creative process and how all of these things work for you?
Yeah, well, I recently did a conference, and my the subject of my lecture was Procreate Saved My Life. And ironically, though, I've been using Procreate on an iPad for about 3 years now, but and ironically, it's always what we don't have, isn't it? I do miss that hand-rendered work. It's much more laborious, as Graeme will attest, you know, having to do everything manually and then do the finishing art digitally and compose it all digitally and all that kind of thing. So moving to Procreate literally probably did save my life physically, because you know, working on a computer and drawing on a computer can be really, really tough on the body. So being able to curl up with an iPad, you know, lie down, move around, walk, all that kind of thing is really eased a lot of, I was getting quite bad pain, physical pain. And yeah, so it's been a blessing, and like anything, it's also been a curse, because I do miss that traditional way of operating. But as Graeme well knows, you can just do so much digitally. It's quite astonishing what you can do, and even woodcuts you can do. You know, you can do stamping, you can do watercolor digitally, you can do inking digitally. So it's kind of a blessing and a curse. It's good in so many ways, but then sometimes I just turn around. I have this desk behind me. You can probably see where I used to do all of my illustrating. Beautiful outlook into the garden, lovely bright light, these beautiful, Graeme, I know you understand the smell of the paints and the beautiful, you know, textures and pencils and erasers and all that kind of thing. I actually really miss, but yeah, I'm a digital convert.
Good on you. I think, yeah, just for me, it's the actual idea, the image, which is in my head, and what I want, that's what I want to share. I want you to see this. And it doesn't matter about the medium, the technique, that's the idea is the paramount thing. And how you generate that idea should be driven by what's going to be best, what's going to get that from your head onto paper most honestly in the best way. And that's what I'm saying about working now on screen, is that I can actually get my ideas out of my head and onto the book more effectively than I could when I was limited by working with brush and pen and ink and paper, because eventually I would actually be, you know, tearing up the board that I was working on, where I was just trying to get this work and the detail and making a mistake and going back and you know, it was breaking down as a medium, as a system.
Yeah, and just that double finger tap that you can just undo.
Yeah,
it's like the you know, when you written something with text, you can just undo it. It's quite phenomenal. It really is a joy to and the different layers, Graeme. You're not going to go through the layers on your iPad, are you? You're going to go through the watercolor paper, and yeah, so it's quite phenomenal.
I don't know enough about the actual digital techniques, but is it easier working in digital because you can correct things more effectively than, you know, more traditional mediums?
Oh, absolutely. And I think too, like with Evie and Pog, it was line drawing through the book. So I would actually sit on a couch with paper and a pencil, a mechanical pencil, and I would sketch them, all of the illustrations, and then I'd come back and go over with a liner, black liner. Then I'd have to scan into my computer, then I'd have to do all the finishing art, I'd have to strengthen the lines, remove all the pencil lines, I'd have to make all the lines the right size, because, you know, if I did something too big or too small, the lines of each character were different sizes. So it was just this process of then, and then I would take them into Photoshop and fill them in with different shades of grey and black, and then I'd have to transport that over into another program, and then I'd assemble pages, and then I'd go to InDesign. Honestly, doing it on an iPad from book 2 would probably cut the time by a fifth, because it was literally one layer to sketch, one layer to ink, and then another layer to fill in, and bam, airdrop to my Mac, straight into InDesign. It was just,
Nice.
it's phenomenally attractive.
Graeme?
I think most important for me is that it gives me choice. I can go. I remember working, in pen and ink on a bit of board, and it was so precious that I'd spent weeks literally working on this picture, and if I made a mistake now, that's going to be it. And I remember actually being paralyzed by indecision on whether I was going to go for a blue sky as I'd originally planned, or would it be better to set it, with a sort of a streak of, sort of sun or yellow or red from something. And I had one chance of getting this right. And there's plenty of pictures from, over the years where I went, yeah, I probably made the wrong choice there. I wish I had, done this, that, or the other. But, I couldn't go back. I couldn't do it again. I just don't have it in me to redo the work. So that was that. Whereas, with working on screen, I can give it a go. As you say, I could just sort of do a layer and try that, stormy, sort of red tinged cloud sky, and go, nah, that's rubbish, and do it back the other way that I was planning. So that's the power, is that it gives the creator the ability to try different things. Again, like in music, if somebody was orchestrating something and they spent half their life orchestrating the score, and then decided, gee, I wish I'd given that part to the trumpets rather than the strings, would have been so much better. Well, if they're working on a computer-based composing system, try it. If it works, great, that's better. So it's about making things, the way that you possibly, as good as you can possibly make them. Computers help.
Belle, have you noticed anything in particular about digital and traditional methods in children's books, and that change from the traditional to digital in the centre and all of the books that you've been receiving through there?
We hold a lot of artwork by Alison Lester, and originally her artwork was much like Tanya and Graeme were describing, the laborious way of, if I don't like it, I have to start all over again. But she now uses a combination. She will bring in materials, actual fabric materials, and cut various collage pieces and put them in, and then she'll change her mind because she's digitized it. And now she's, changed the whole background of the layout, or she can move her characters around. But in a way, I wonder whether we are losing out, us as observers and lovers of the creative process. Are we going to miss out on seeing some of your ideas and the evolution? And I mean, I'm so happy that you don't have carpal tunnel syndrome and backaches and things like that now, because you're able to use the digital arts. But I would just make a plea that there's so many of us who really want to see the creative changes and the creative process. So please don't go totally digital is one of the pleas, because it's not just me. It's that little girl who came in and saw that Bob Graeme was able to scratch things out.
Yeah.
One answer to that is to time lapse record your work. I confess I haven't done it, but it was suggested to me, where you can sort of see over a period of however many days or weeks it takes to do a piece of artwork. The process, in sort of fast motion. So look, I hear what you're saying, Belle, and it's true that my more recent works, there's far less stuff in the cardboard boxes than there used to be, but it can be done digitally if we.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and also can I also say that on Procreate there's actually a permanent record of what you create. So so everything I've ever created on my iPad, I can replay.
I'm happy.
You could actually, so you can actually see the entire process. Yeah, and in fact, I showed a film during this conference, and one of the girls, the first thing she said was, "I'm just intrigued with what you erased why did you erase that part? I thought it was great. But then you did the next bit, and it was even better. And I'm like, well, hello. But that digital process, that is actually available on some programs. But Belle, I hear you. I understand what you're saying. And I do actually miss doing hand-rendered work, and I'm actually looking at some hand-rendered work as I'm sitting here from Mamie, some tiny little watercolors that I did, and I absolutely treasure them, and I don't get that from a picture on my screen. So it's like anything, I do hope to return to some of this eventually once I regain some youth.
We might turn to some of our audience questions because we're at 10 to 12. Goodness, where did the time go? We will stay on as long as we can to get through some of the questions. The first one, I think you already answered, Graeme, which was about Animalia coming out and how it changed the picture book landscape. How did you feel with the expectations that came from that? Is there anything else you wanted to comment on in that space?
I've taken comfort for the fact that what you tend to only just get one. I was going to use the old example of one Dark Side of the Moon, Pink Floyd's whopper commercial success. If Animalia was my Dark Side of the Moon, well, I got it very early in life, and I'm forever grateful for it. But you can't expect it to happen twice. And the truth is that even now, that single title, is by far, the most well-known of anything that I've done, or probably anything I ever will do. But I don't let that worry me. I just go on thinking, wow, yeah, there's another idea, another world that I want to sort of develop. Although I'm sure the publishers would love them all to be Animalia, simply isn't possible. You go mad, as I said. There's no sequel. There's no sequel to Animalia, not in my mind anyway.
No. Clayton has asked, do you have any stories or projects that you've worked hard on but just couldn't get to work for whatever reason? That's probably one for either Graeme or Tanya, or both of you.
Well, yes. Again, when I visit schools, kids say, how many books have you written? And I say probably 700. Like literally, from picture book through to whatever else, and but only a small fraction of those are published, and there's a reason behind that. And there's the good old bottom drawer for authors as well, where you've got all these manuscripts that you've worked on over the years, and they're stuck in your bottom drawer, and you try to resurrect them. Bad mistake. Very rarely works. Probably 0.01% of the time will an old idea be able to be resurrected and created into something fabulous. So definitely there's been projects that I've been that I would have loved to have come to light, but I don't know what it is. It's just doesn't have that magic to it, and letting go is part of the process, and allowing that idea to disappear, I think, is a strength.
Belle or me or
Graeme, do you want to go first?
Sure. I have this term for the ones that happen, the ideas that got away. I've got these what I call ghost books, because I get these sort of white dummy books, which are just white cover, white pages, which you could just sort of use to sort of fill in with ideas. And I'll tend to sort of write a title on one, because it's that brings it all back to me, what I want to do, or create a little sort of logo type of the title, and then it just sort of sits there on the bookshelf. And I don't know, there's 12 or 14 ghost books all sort of lined up of things. Oh, it'd be great to do that. There's also ones which came out differently to I expected. One was Truck Dogs, which I wrote a complete poem and did a whole book of rough pencil drawings of exactly how it was all going to work out, and with my publisher knowing all about this and being supporting me, but the wheels fell off when we went to on-sell it to the American publishers in New York, who've published me for a long time, and they were a bit sort of startled and worried about it. These Truck Dogs characters are sort of half dog and half truck, hence the name. But for the Americans, they were worried that it was going to be kind of freaky and weird out all the little kids, and they suddenly sort of kind of put up this red flag. Which was my first sort of smack in the face with a kind of like an almost rejection. So as chance had it, I was just about to head off on a long book tour in America. for something like 5 or 6 weeks. And when I first hit the ground in LA, this was in my mind. And because I was in LA and because I was totally jet lagged and it was like 2 a.m, I opened my laptop and I just wrote down, I typed rather, Truck Dogs the movie, because I was in LA. And I just started writing this idea down as a screenplay. 5 or 6 weeks later, I still wasn't over the jet lag because every night I was just staying up until like 4 or 5 a.m. writing this thing because I was getting obsessed with the idea of it as a story rather than a picture book. By the time I got back to Australia, that screenplay was pretty well written. And I thought, well, okay, maybe I could make a movie out of it. But I decided what I would try to do first is still publish the book. So I took that text and kind of novelized it, took all of the dialogue, all of the scenes, everything about it, but kind of formatted it so it would be a novel for young readers. It remains the first and only novel I've ever done. I'm still yet to make the movie. That's a whole nother discussion.
Maybe one day.
Also, I've never let go of all. I've got boxes and boxes of drawings because that's back in the old days when everything was done by hand. And I've got stacks and all the original black and white pictures. And recently, about 5 years ago, I struck up a great relationship with a Chinese publisher who was sort of busy putting out everything that I've ever done in Mandarin. And they caught sight of the picture book version of Truck Dogs and love it. So they're still thinking that they might bring Truck Dogs finally as a picture book with a Mandarin translation of my original poem. And yay, that'll happen at last. But that's been one of the big, long kind of projects that's been going on now for quite literally decades in my mind. And maybe it'll finally come to fruition.
Yes, well, hopefully. Let's keep an eye out for that one. Belle, did you have anything that you wanted to comment on in this space? You're not an illustrator, but you have written some books about books. And I'm sure you've had projects, be it an exhibition or something that maybe hasn't come to fruition.
I'll pass on that question, Sarah.
Yep, that's okay. Quite all right. We have a question especially for Tanya asking, how hard is it to swap between a book you write and illustrate to one that you write and someone else illustrates?
Oh gosh, well, I've only illustrated a few books for other people. I have another one coming up in the new year and that will probably be my last. I think there's pros and cons to having two people work together. I think there's a real beautiful dance between an author and an illustrator in a lot of ways. And I call it this third presence. It's almost like the combined thoughts of both create this third entity. So I have found working with other creators, particularly my good friend Jess Rackleft, there's this real dance between us and it creates this magic. So I'm also very respectful of someone else's work. So, for example, I just did Wonderful Shoes with Emma Bowd, and it's a preschooler sort of book for little ones, and it's just onomatopoeic text, and it's very, very, very simple little rhyming text. It's just gorgeous. And I so respected her text, I so respected her narrative, and so working with her, I loved her to be able to comment on illustration, which she did, and I encouraged that. So I think if you can let go of having to control things, I think it's really great to work with someone else because it does bring wonderful synergy. But then working on my own is also glorious because I really have to stretch myself and I have to come up with ways to take that text and create a visual narrative, and I'm really intent on the tiniest of details. And often I'll be actually drifting off to sleep and I'll think, just one tiny little bird flying across the sky. Oh my goodness, that will have such meaning because of what happened on page 2. And, and if it has that yellow feather on, and then that will tie in with what happens at the end on the last spread, and all of those lovely things that just kind of pop up out of nowhere. That's more difficult to get when you're dealing with someone else, because you're the only one in your own head, and I can't be in Jess's head permanently when I work with her. So they're both very different, and I don't know which I prefer. I actually really enjoy both, so I can't really say what I prefer more, although working on my own is quicker and easier in terms of production time, and the back and forth. So yeah.
That
Great
makes
question.
sense.
Mm.
Do any other children's writers or illustrators inspire your work? This is one for both Tanya and Graeme, I think.
Mm.
Graeme, did you want to
Yeah,
comment first?
probably the single most inspirational modern day illustrator for me is Chris Van Allsburg, the American,
Wow.
because he's so versatile. Not only are his ideas really strongly visual and imaginative, every book he'll figure out a different way of illustrating. You know, he did a black and white book, Two Bad Ants. It was absolutely stunning, and that I made the mysteries of Harris Burdick. I might have got the title wrong, but basically, fantastic sort of stuff, incredible technique and versatility, and it was linked to an endlessly creative imagination. So for me, he's the guy.
Mm.
Fantastic. And Tanya?
I have him right here. I mean, this is how obsessed I am. And there's also a picture of his over here on my desk. Miroslav Sazek has informed so much of my colour palettes, of my, the way I lay out, the way I design. Even the books that I've created have been inspired by him. I just find, I guess I'm a bit old-fashioned in that way, that I just love these, stunning retro style illustrations, and his ability to create character is quite phenomenal. And even, on the cover here, it's such a simple design, such a simple, structure of this man, but just the way he's holding the book has that tension and movement. So I've learned a lot from his work. And then of course there's countless people that inspire me. I'm not going to name names. I'm sure you can imagine. Okay, Anna Walker. Okay, Graeme Base. Gus Gordon. I just think it's it's so vital to be looking at other people's work. And one thing that I will tell illustrators who are emerging, or people that just love to draw, there is nothing wrong in your own space to copy other people's works. And I spent many years copying Miroslav Sazek's work. In fact, I have a few direct copies of some of his images from his books, just to practice and just to develop your own style. There's nothing wrong with doing that. Just don't sell it on Etsy. It's my only advice.
Very good point. Thank you. The next question is, how do you all feel about illustrating unreliable narrative in terms of supporting the storyline? Are you comfortable doing this, feeling it can enhance and add value, or distract and confuse readers, both from a creative and consumer point of view?
Goodness.
Absolutely. But if it means adding sort of layers of meaning or intent, or possible just avenues of exploration which are not fully resolved, I think that's fine. It's the thing that I've discovered that in America they have a problem with. They want me to tell you everything and give it all to you. Like I did a book called Uno's Garden. It was a book which had a sort of a number, arithmetic kind of like backbone of doubling and squaring things and then reducing and so forth, just to try and get across the idea of how things can get out of control, where if people come into an environment and start multiplying too fast, and then other things begin to diminish very, very rapidly, things get out of balance. The book was essentially a plea for balance in the natural world, but because it had this arithmetic sort of idea behind it, the publishers over there wanted to put a big sticker on the book saying "Fun Math Counting Book." I think, no. If you want every kid in the universe to run a mile from what should otherwise be a joyous, exploration and discovery, but what they wanted to sell it. They wanted people to know what was there. Whereas I kind of don't. I want you to read it once and then go, oh, wait a sec, and then you go back and read it again. And you go, I get, gee, there's all this extra stuff. Now that's the joy of discovery. So I'm not sure that answered the question, but the idea of there being stuff which you're not quite sure where, leaving it open-ended is a good thing, because it engenders that participation of the reader in discovering, what the book means to them.
I can't agree more. I have a deep frustration with didactic or obvious text that, basically, that show and tell thing with picture books. You show, you don't tell. So you don't actually say what's happening in the illustration. And you don't illustrate what the text says. You have this sub-narrative running with the illustration. So I've had a similar situation with Plume in that we are publishing into other territories, so the UK and North America, and the difference between those different territories is huge. And of course in the States things do like to be explained more. And I personally find that I find that very, very difficult. I understand why it has to happen, but it doesn't make it any easier to say what the illustration says is I find it grates on me to like physically, I'll just seize up. But I understand why. I do. Well, actually, I don't understand why, but I do know what I mean. I do. It's a tough one, that one.
Belle, do you have a view on that?
No, I'll
No?
pass on that.
That's all right. There's actually a question about a bit of advice. Is it more difficult to publish a book if you choose to write and illustrate the content? Doing a small course and have been told that publishers prefer to select the illustrator of your book. So perhaps you'd like to comment on that one, Graeme.
For me, it was always just a no-brainer. Oh no, it's not true, because I did start by illustrating texts for a couple of other people very, very early on in my career. And I was thinking when Tanya was answering this, that how much she enjoys that. I was thinking how much I loathe it. In fact, I even have trouble just having an editor. It's for me, it's not so. It's like pitched warfare. No. I absolutely have to have a comma there, or no, that's the word, not this. It's terrible. I suppose I'm not very good at sharing, to be honest. So the idea of working with somebody else who's actually alive is really hard for me. Well, the only book that I've done in more recent history was my version of Lewis Carroll's Jabberwocky, because he saved me dead, and he wasn't going to tell me what I should and shouldn't do, and all that, which is even better. I can't remember the answer to the question now. I've just gone off on a.
Just whether it's more difficult to publish the book if you
write
and illustrate.
Okay, so I don't know. I guess if you've got the publisher's confidence that you actually can do both, then great, because they don't have to worry about trying to mix and match and find somebody. But if you think, look, I'm only illustrating this because somebody told me I ought to, well, forget it. Just give them the manuscript, and they can, they've got lists and lists of illustrators. And the opposite too. Just if you're a strong illustrator, give them the illustrations, and they'll put you on that list and find texts that might interest you. So there's no cut and dried way of doing this. It's just play to your strengths and don't pretend that you're good at something that you're not.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Graeme. I think that too, if you're emerging, whether you're an author and an illustrator or both, I think that the creation of a picture book is so much more than just illustrating the text. It has a dance, it has that synergy, but it also has its own parallel narrative. It has, it has to affect, think of something cinematically. So we zoom in on a page, we zoom out on another. We have different, an aerial perspective, side perspectives. There's a real rhythm to it that, honestly, to be honest with you, I think someone emerging just hasn't yet learned. And it's not until you are actually designing and laying out a book and have created many books that, even if you do have an understanding of books, which I'm sure some of you do, but you need to have that experience. So bringing in someone, particularly with a narrative picture book, bringing in someone who's never done it before can be really difficult, even if you are talented. And also, a publisher likes to have control over the illustrations because they're so vital for picture books. They have to be accomplished and beautiful. And I know with my early books as an illustrator, I look back in full cringe at how shocking they are. So giving yourself the space and time to at least get a relationship happening with the publisher, getting a manuscript accepted is so exciting and wonderful, allowing the publisher to have, to trust them. that they will know whether an illustrator is accomplished enough to do justice to your work. And then certainly if you're talented, it's something you could bring in, as I have done with my career. I've brought in my illustrations gradually. So my advice would be to, it's not that publishers are anti-author illustrator by, you know, they love that, because as Graeme was saying, it's actually easier, it costs them less money, all those kinds of things, to have, you know, one person do everything. So stupid people like me that literally take a book to press and do everything. Yeah, they love that, but you'd have to have you have to have some experience. So that might be my advice, is to just get at least a manuscript in.
Thank you for that. Belle, we have a couple of questions for you about the National Centre for Australian Children's Literature. One is about how you collect an artist's process when they are working digitally, and the other about how you store digital images at the centre. I guess they're kind of related.
We don't have very many collections of digital items. For the most part, the people that are donating to us are still working cross platforms. You know, they might have, like the ones I was describing about Alice and Lester. So we don't have that kind of collection as yet.
Yeah, okay, thank you. It's one that's probably going to come in the next few years, I'm sure. The next question is, what do you think about black and white illustrations communicating and what they communicate that colour doesn't, and vice versa? Graeme, do you have a view on that?
No, not really. It's just that I wanted to do it. I was sort of. I think publishers have a view on it, which is that, you know, black and white pictures don't sell as well because they're a little bit harder to sort of, you know, I suppose, get into. You know, I suppose there's sort of a sense that kids like colour, which I totally resist and disagree with. What kids love is totally their own business, and we're not there to tell them that. You just do what you love and then hope that they will see something in it. So again, that was that honesty thing for me. Yeah, I knew that probably the publisher, if I'd said, oh, look, I've decided to do them in colour after all, they would have breathed a sigh of relief, because it would have been an easier thing for them to go, yep, good, another Graeme Base book, we know what that looks like. But I wanted to do something different as an artist, as a creator, and it meant something to me from my childhood. You know, doing this, you know, sort of like, you know, channeling Albrecht Dürer in a terribly B-grade fashion, I've got to confess, in terms of just, wow, no, I shouldn't go on with it, but he's just amazing. So, yeah, don't think that doing black and white is necessarily a good idea. Like I once suggested to my publisher, oh, it'll be cheaper because you can just print the book, you know, in black and white rather than colour. Actually, not true. They still print it in full colour, but all together as black and white. Like if you know, otherwise the black just looks really sort of washed out and sort of wimpy. You've got to go black, and then on top of the black you put red and, you know, magenta and cyan and so forth, and it all comes to a nice rich black. And anyway, there is a very subtle sort of old antique parchment kind of tone to the backgrounds on those pictures anyway. So they're not true on my book. Worse, the Curse of the Vampire Robot. It's still actually a full color book, but it just looks like old black and white pictures.
Tanya, have you ever done any just black and white, found them different to colour and the different things that you're communicating in them?
The only thing I've done black and white has been the illustrations for Evie and Pog. So it was an early chapter reader, so every page was illustrated. So it's just line drawings with different shades of you know, black, grey, white. So that was the only one, and obviously that's a cost thing. For chapter books, it's less expensive. You can use lighter paper, all those kinds of things. But I haven't considered doing something black and white for a picture book. I'm not against it. I just love colour. Personally, I just thrive on it, and I thrive on the nuance of colour and combining colours. So yeah. It's not something that I would probably pursue, but who knows? We'll see.
Graeme, a question for you about Animalia. How long did a page of pictures take for one letter? It's probably, how long is a piece of string?
Took 3 years.
Wow.
Of a very, very sort of young, early career. I was thinking, what am I doing? 3 years, I could be putting out, you know, all sorts of other things in that time. But and the worst picture, I think, or the one which took the longest turned out to be the P page, proud peacocks preening perfect plumage, because I'd made a bit of a mistake all the way through the book. I've been adding these little characters, like on the D page was Dumbo, on the M page was Mickey Mouse, and my publisher at the time, Bob Sessions, God bless him, said, Graeme, we probably ought to ask Disney if that's okay. So we drafted a very polite letter and sent it off to Mr. Disney. I got a response back saying, no, it's not okay, and you've got to expunge these images from your book or we're going to sue you. So I had to go through all of the pictures and just eradicate all of these Disney, which is why there's an awful lot of bushes and clouds in the book. On the pink page, there was Peter Pan, there was Pinocchio, but if you look down on the bottom right-hand corner of the P page, you will see there's a panda who's picking up pine cones. But if you look closer, and he's very rotund, very sort of distinct silhouette. And if you look, he's actually only a pseudo panda or pretend panda because he's got press studs up the side of his costume. And you realize, in fact, it's Pooh Bear, because I was told, when I finished this book, I was told, oh, wait a sec, you've still got Pooh Bear. I said, no, that Pooh Bear, that doesn't belong to Disney, does it? And they said, yeah, they bought it about 6 months ago. So he's got to go. That's what I did there. But also, if you look just there, just near where he's picking up the pine cones, there's another bush there next to a pedestal, and that's Piglet. Piglet turned into yet another just bit of foliage. So yeah, that took me a long time to just go through and change all these things.
Oh, God.
Wow. Someone has also commented that they think maybe Truck Dogs could make a good video game.
Yeah, you want to do it?
There's probably someone out there who'd give it a go.
Make me an offer. No, you're dead right. Actually, it's almost like that's the new feature film is video. It's really exciting. I've never got into video games, but I'm really entranced when I go, wow, look at that stuff. What's happening now? So 100%, it would make a great video game, and I think you should go out there, whoever said that, and make it happen for me.
Fantastic. There you go. Okay, we might just take a few more questions before we finish. The first one is that relates to what you said, Tanya, about the magic of creating. And Michelle wants to know, how does the creative process fit into the daily life of your daily life and your routines?
Well, for me, it's I wake at about 6:30. I have a quick Instagram cruise and a coffee, and then I get my iPad and I illustrate until about 7 p.m. And at the moment, I stay in bed because my daughter is at home and she's set up our main living area where I normally work. She's set it up as a mini office because she's online every day. So I literally spend the day in bed, literally till 6 or 7 every day. And then I have dinner, and then I get on the couch and my husband and I will watch something on TV, and I will illustrate while I watch TV until about 9 or 10. And that's 7 days a week. So there you go. That's what I'm doing.
Wow. That sounds relaxed.
Yeah.
Graeme, what's your routine?
Yeah.
I don't know, I'm a bit gobsmacked. Mine's really random. And in fact, at the moment, I'm not doing anything much at all. As I'm outside, sort of doing woodwork and building decks and stuff. I'm on a bit of a sabbatical week, one could say. I don't think I've retired because there's too many ghost books still on that shelf that I want to make real. But it's really erratic. One of the, sometimes I work absolutely just frantically because I'm inspired, and sometimes I can't just look at it, because I just don't know which way to go. So it's very, very varied for me, and totally dependent. Actually, it's dependent on two things. One is inspiration, and one is the proximity of the deadline. One of the things that I learned very early on, I used to work briefly in advertising when I was fresh out of college. I hated it, and they hated me. I went through about 3 jobs in quick succession and finally got fired, from which I never looked back. But during that time, I understood the importance of deadlines. You just don't miss them, and I've carried that through in my work. because you need to be really disciplined. Somebody said to me, but also to stop, discipline to stop. Somebody said to me once that the problem from working from home is you never get home from work.
Yeah.
My kids made that clear to me once. My first child, James, once he was angry about something, because I couldn't come to school for some performance or something. And I said, hey, James, give me a break. I'm at home all the time. And he said, no, you're not, Dad. You're at work all the time. Whoa. So I learned that I actually have to, even when I'm passionately inspired by something, I've got to also know when to stop.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Belle, question for you from Annette. One of my favourite stories is about Shy the Platypus. Do you have any views about writing sad stories as picture books for children?
Oh, there's so many sad books. And, quite frankly, books are very empathetic in their own way. They give you that chance to experience sadness or death or any of the other life crises that we all face, even as children. So I think, these books are really important. And if you did any kind of subject search on sadness, you come up with dozens of books, but they're not hand-fisted in the sense that they're pushing or promoting. They're not actually trying to really make you feel sad. They're trying to help you get over that feeling of sadness by experiencing through someone else. So empathy is one thing that is really important in kids' books, and the really good ones, they have it in there.
I strongly. We shouldn't be afraid of taking kids on a journey. You just got to judge how far, up and down the journey goes. With Uno's Garden, it was critical to the story that halfway through, my character, Uno, eventually, because he's collecting this, like a Noah's Ark, if you like, or, of plants and animals as things begin to go wrong in the forest. His work has to be carried on by other generations. So it's necessary, he has to die, And I remember the publishers going, whoa, you're having your character die in the middle of the book here, Graeme. I said, yeah, it's really important. But of course, his legacy lives on. And then you've got the kids and the grandkids, and it's really his thing. The book simply wouldn't have been the same if I'd sort of made out that it could all just happen within one lifetime by one person. One person makes a difference, what's called Uno's Garden, but it takes many, many people to pick up on that inspiration to affect real change.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got 5 more questions. We might see if we can just whiz through them. Some of them are hopefully fairly short ones. Graeme, would you ever illustrate another author's text?
No. Next question.
I thought I could guess that answer from something you said earlier.
You've broken my heart, Graeme. I'm crushed. I'm on the floor.
Tanya, I've just lost my question. Excuse me 1 second. Tanya, what do you do if a writer gives so much detail on requested illustration, there is little work for imagination?
I have a publisher buffer. Most of the people that I've worked with understand that the illustrator needs to have that creative license and have that distance from what they want. This is why if you're an emerging writer, publishers will often say, look, give me illustration notes only if they cannot, if you need to explain something that the text is not showing yet, because obviously we don't have illustrations yet. So yeah, I think it's having that space is really vital, and someone who's experienced will understand that and allow that to happen. If I'm working with someone new, I will have a publisher buffer. So often my editor or publisher will come, not between us, but will sort of be that buffer between that will make gentle suggestions on either side, which can be really helpful as well. But every experience I've had so far has been fantastic. I am working with someone early next year that I've never worked with before. So I may need a little bit of buffering because I don't yet know him and don't know how he operates. He seems absolutely lovely and I'm sure it's going to be fine. But yeah, just having that extra support is important. But I'm more than happy to put my hand up and say, listen, I need that space, or I want to go in this direction. And invariably the author will go, oh, wow, I didn't think of it that way. And that's part of the magic, I guess, of that 2-person dance.
For Graeme and Tanya, from a developing illustrator, With decent illustration skills, a good work ethic and plenty of perseverance, do you believe you can make a decent living from illustrating books if you stick with it long term?
Yeah, well, all the key things are there. You know, skills, good work ethic, perseverance. Yeah, that's the list. Absolutely. I think there was one of my favorite quotes, very pithy, was the oil baron, Paul Getty Jr., who's had his recipe for success. It was rise early, which is work hard, strike oil. So basically, it's rise early. It's because you're passionate. You have something that you need and want to say. You know, work hard. As Mark Twain said, you know, the harder I work, the luckier I get. And you've got to have a work ethic. Nobody's telling you to do this. It's got to be coming from you to sit down and just do the hard slog. And don't expect it to be quick. No, absolutely. Long term, that's there in the question as well. But it's also that last thing about strike oil. You've got to get lucky. And it does play a part. In my own career, I was so lucky that I found the right publisher with the right idea when I was still very young, and it sort of carved out a career for me. Sometimes it happens much later in life, but as I say, you know, the harder you work, the luckier you get. So it's not just going to fall in your lap, but you can, I think, reasonably expect, if you keep doing that, if you keep passionate and you do have perseverance and perspiration and that, then a bit of provenance as well will come your way. So yes.
Yeah, I can't agree more, Graeme. And I think that I've been in the children's book industry nearly 15 years, and it's only really been the past 5 years that I've earned very well. So it slow increase and then suddenly boom. And I never forget Jackie French saying to me once, you need 10 years to make an impact in this industry, unless, as Graeme said, said that there's some miraculous thing happens and you suddenly get exposure. But for the majority of people, you're looking at a decade of your life. And in that time, I would highly recommend just continually honing your skill set and just improving, trying different techniques, trying different mediums, that kind of thing. But give yourself a decade, and if you have that persistence and you have that talent, most certainly you can earn a very good income.
That goes a little bit to the question that's been asked about finding ways to improve your work in its early phases, and what do you find helpful to see your work with a critical eye?
The best way that I found of having a new perspective on a picture is, in the old days, I used to prop it up in actually in the bedroom. This is the idea of never knowing when to stop work, and having it angled so that the first thing I saw when I woke up in the mirror was the picture in the mirror. When I woke up in the morning was to see that picture in the mirror. So I'd see a complete reverse flip of the picture, because it gives you a whole sudden sense of the design. Is it really working? What's the first thing I see? Because you get so used to what you've got on paper. And of course, you can still do that on the computer. Just go, boom, flip image horizontally or even vertically, and suddenly you see the colors differently and you see the design differently. So that's a bit of a trick.
I love that. And I think a thing that I have helped develop my own illustration is all about movement. So there's a big difference, for example, just this little girl on the cover here, the movement in her, it's, exaggerating movement is really important. And even when someone is standing stationary, they're not just like this, they're not slumped, their shoulders are risen, their neck is poised. Even someone in a very inactive stance can have movement to their body. So that kind of thing. But another thing that's really helped me is understanding angles and also the eye placement. A lot of new illustrators will place eyes in the completely wrong spot, or they make the eyes too large. If you look at Anna Walker's work, on a regular face, if we're doing just a characterization of the human body, on a regular face, our eyes are quite high up and set in. But when you're drawing a little character like Anna Walker does, the eyes are probably placed about here. The nose and mouth is squished right up, and it gives that cuteness, and they're quite wide, the eyes, and they're quite small. So just looking at where you place an eye, if you are lucky enough to be able to work digitally, have a look, grab that little dot, that little eye, and move that sucker around that face, and just watch how it will transform your work. Similarly with eyebrows, the way you place an eyebrow, the angle, the shape of it, and where it's placed on the head can completely transform your work. So movement and facial elements are a huge way to advance things.
Fantastic, thank you. Our final question is, do you do other art apart from your book illustration work? Do you do art for yourself, exhibiting, or only illustration? Tanya.
Please, Tanya.
Okay, not at the moment, as you just heard. It's only book deadlines up the wazoo for the next year and a half. But after that, I'm very much craving to do some editorial illustration. I've done a little bit before and I absolutely love it because you can just basically work on one image or a series of vignettes and put that time and creativity into those and not have to worry about narrative, you know, as in an entire narrative. So I would love to be able to do that sometime soon and get back to hand rendered work for sure. I miss being able to just be creative, just for fun, just for play. And Graeme, I know you're in that stage where you can do more of that if you wish, even though you're busy with the farm. But yeah, very busy. But yeah, I think it's, yeah, I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully in about 18 months, I can do one picture.
Graeme.
Me, no, I don't, and I don't actually aspire to. I find that, you know, the way I approach each and every illustration in the books also has a component of imagining it hung on a wall. You know, where I think each piece, you know, could be framed and sort of, you know, put up on a wall if somebody wished to. Some more than others. So in some ways, I kind of do both in one fell swoop, where I'm realizing my creative ambitions and telling the stories and messages that I want to as an artist and as a person. And lucky enough to, you know, for that to be, you know, a career in that there is an outlet in books for it. But there's nothing that I'm happier than is to see, you know, the work up on a wall, and which actually segues to, you know, what's happening at the moment with the worst band in the universe, the exhibition which is on. This is in some ways the end game for my art, and I just love it when I get them framed and. You know, in the digital world, we still make limited edition prints, and they finish up on a wall somewhere. And that, to me, that's the art that I've been creating.
That's a fantastic spot to finish on, and a good reminder to everyone that there is an exhibition that will be at the Belco Arts Centre very soon, as soon as the restrictions are all out of allowing for that to take place from, I think it's around the end of November. Please follow Belco Arts online, and those artworks are thanks to the National Centre for Australian Children's Literature. So thank you very much to them as well. And thank you to all our panel for your time and sharing the wisdom of your experience today, especially to Graeme, Tanya and Belle for doing that. And thank you to our audience for joining us. We have gone a lot longer, but it did enable us to answer many questions that came through from the audience, which was fantastic. So thank you to Belco Arts for hosting today's event. And thank you, everybody. That's the end of our event today.
Pleasure.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.